some really important concepts, super important. I would say even more important than the endocannabinoid system. So today we're going to be talking about fasting and fed. And we're lucky today to be joined by an audience. So we're going to be doing this one live, and we're actually going to be doing this one live in front of an audience. The audio may get a little dicey if I have people answering questions. So again, if someone here in person asks a question, then I'll repeat that to you guys that are listening at home. And you guys can hear the question that way and hear the way that we get that answered. I kind of have this, and again, I didn't have room in the posting information to post the outline. So there is an outline associated with this, and Cindy will probably fix that as we go. But I'll follow along according to that outline, and I'll kind of pause in between the outline topics, and that way if there's questions, we'll kind of hold for questions and wait till we have a space in there in those topics. Let me send this to Cindy just real quick here. Guys, hold on just a second. Bear with me for a second. Let me get this information to Miss Cynthia. And she'll get that up in the link, and that way you guys can, if you're at home and kind of watching this at home, you can follow along. Okay, very good. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Again, if you can't, you might note that in the stream. And then you guys here, I'm sure can hear me okay. So what I'm going to do, I've got my notes here, which I'll try not to read too much from my notes. I just want to talk you guys through these concepts. But we're going to talk about fasting and fed. Again, as I talked about, this is probably one of the most important concepts that I could teach you. As we walk through this, you're going to fight a lot of these concepts with just misconceptions, let's say, things that we've been taught and things that we just don't understand about how we work. But this is stuff that could be taught to third graders and should be taught to every third grader because it's so important about how we work and how we function. So, first piece of information is, I hate to tell you this, but we tend to think of ourselves as this collective thing. I'm Chip, I'm a thing. But if I really break you down into what you are, you're just a collection of cells, right? And those cells are classifiable, and all life is really just made up of three types of cells, okay? So unnucleated cells, and those are called say the word, Jennifer. Prokaryote.
That's a lot.
Yeah, eukaryotes are the nucleated cells. So, and then there's cells in between that are called archaea. And so these are the different, so you can think of that word of cells as being bacterial, so they don't have a nucleus. Then you have cells that are kind of in between, and then you have nucleated cells. But your liver is made up of these cells. Your brain is made up of these cells. Everything in you is just a collection, an organization of these cells. How do they all go together? You'll have to ask God that one because he's got that answer, but I'll just tell you that you are a collection of these cells. Now, it's super important to understand that you generate energy only as good as the individual cells inside of you generate energy. Your health really is related to the health of the individual cells inside of you. So, important concept. If my cells are sick, if my cells are not getting what they need, if I don't understand what my cells need, then I'm probably going to be sick. If my cells are super healthy, then I'm going to be super healthy. Okay, everybody got that? Sure, I think that we do. Okay, and then I'm always going to refer back, and I wanted to go to the cell thing first, but I'm always going to refer back to podcast 1, because in podcast 1, we talk a lot about mitochondrial efficiency. And we talk about that there's different states that you can run a mitochondria on. So these cells that I just talked about, the nucleated cells, the eukaryotic cells, and that's what we're made of for the most part. We certainly have bacteria in us, and we know about our microbiome and all that, so those are different kinds of cells, but most of us are made up of eukaryotic cells, and these eukaryotic cells will have 3 different states that they can run in. If you're a plant, you will photosynthesize. Again, we won't talk about that one. But if you're a human or a mammal, then you have really 2 states that we're going to talk about today that you can be in as to mitochondrial efficiency. Now, I'm going to give these an analogy, and I'm going to use this analogy all through what we talk about. So your least efficient way to run, your least efficient way to fuel your mitochondria is with a water substrate, so water, stuff that will solubilize in water, called glucose, or sugar, dietary sugars, right? Every single cell of these 3 mentioned will run on glucose. Glucose is kind of the universal de facto way to run a cell. So if you give a cell glucose, it's going to run. It doesn't really matter what kind of cell that is. It will use glucose for energy. So it's kind of our least efficient way to run, and I call it plant in the dark mode, okay? So, and there's a reason for that analogy, so let me give you that analogy real quick. So we all understand that if we have a plant, if I have a plant, and I have that plant out in the sunshine, that plant is flourishing, that plant is growing, that plant is doing everything that it needs to do as a plant, if I'm giving it the right amount of water and nutrients and sunlight, that plant will be kind of the highest expression of itself. It will be strong, it will be able to fight off diseases, it will be the best plant it can be. Now I can move that plant, I can take that plant and I can put him in a dark closet. And if I do that, that plant will immediately start to degrade because the plant doesn't have everything that it needs to be its fullest expression of itself. It doesn't have light. Again, if I can restrict the water, just give it enough to stay alive, and restrict the nutrients, just give it enough to stay alive, then we understand that that plant won't be the highest expression of itself. That the longer that it stays in that state, the more susceptible it will be to disease. It might get a pathogen, it might get bacteria, it might get root rot. It's not going to be what it was out in the sun. But the cool thing is we can take that plant and we can drag him out into the sun, give him water and nutrients again, and he'll come right back to the way he was, as strong as he was. So I'm going to use this analogy quite a bit because we have a plant in the dark mode, and that is when our mitochondria are running on glucose. When we're running on glucose, we're like a plant in the dark. And what we're doing is we're building, we're repairing, we're sort of, we're curled in, and we're kind of like, okay, we're going to repair everything that we need to repair right now, but we're not out in the sun. And how do we get out in the sun? We get out in the sun when our mitochondria literally flip from something that has something called AMPK inhibited to AMPK forward. And when we do that, we start burning dietary fats. We start doing things called beta oxidation. We start, you can think of it as we are anaerobic when we're a plant in the dark. And again, if you're a muscle guy or a weightlifter guy, I'll explain that more in detail later. But we're a plant in the dark when we are anaerobic, when we are not using oxygen, and we kind of go into the light when we become aerobic, is one way to look at it. But there's a cellular switch called AMPK. So podcast 1 talks about that in a lot more detail. So if we haven't kind of been clear on that in podcast 1, you might go back and listen to that. But anyway, plant in the dark mode, pretty important concept. Plant in the light mode, pretty important concept. How do we switch between those? Something called AMPK is the switch, or we can look at it as fasting and fed. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is fed mode. And what does it look like when we are in fed mode? And this is our plant in the dark, in the closet mode, okay? So in fed mode, what happens? Well, your body is reactionary, and your body reacts to dietary inputs. And in particular, it reacts to dietary fats. So it's all about the fats in the human body or the mammalian body. So as we eat dietary fats, what happens right off the bat? So anytime you consume more than 50 calories, and it could be fats or it could be sugars, it doesn't really matter. When you eat more than 50 calories, your body stops. It says, oh, we're eating now. I need to go into plant in the dark mode or fed mode because we're eating. And I know that we're eating, and so I've got to adjust, and I'm going to go into repair mode and build mode, and I'm going to go into a different mode than I would be normally. And I understand that by virtue of food coming into my tummy, right? So as soon as 50 calories or more hit your tummy, you will go into a state called fed. And when you're in fed, what happens is your body wants to begin to store and optimize the fats that you're eating and then the fats that you already have stored. So a comparison is made. And where does all this intelligence happen? Hypothalamus, hippocampus, vagal afferent nerve, all the communication. But a decision is made, are the dietary fats that I just ate better or worse than the dietary fats that I have stored in my fat tissue? And if the answer is they're better, then I'm going to start remodeling my fat tissue. I'm going to start pulling in triglycerides from my adipose or fat tissue. I'm going to pull them into my liver. I'm going to take all this fat that I just ate, and I'm going to start reshaping those triglycerides. I'm also, when I'm in this state, I am building cholesterol. So I am absolutely building cholesterol because I use that cholesterol to repair and build tissues. So if you have inflammation, your blood vessels have to extend out into that inflammation to address that inflammation. If you're a weightlifter and you break down your muscles all the time, you've got to rebuild those muscles. If you get a cut or a bruise or a tick or a scrape, you've got to repair that tissue. You've got to rebuild that tissue. How do you do that? You do that in a cholesterol forward way, and you use that cholesterol to rebuild. That's the purpose. Cholesterol has two purposes in your body. Purpose one is structural, building, cells, brain. 40% of the cholesterol in you lives in your brain. Can't remember what percentage of your brain is cholesterol, but it's higher than 40. So again, cholesterol is structural. It's like building material. It's like, what we use to build stuff. And then cholesterol also is a master precursor. If you're a cannabis person, it's our master terpene. Yeah. Think on that one. Put that one in your pipe and smoke it. Cholesterol is an isoprene, and that's what terpenes are, isoprenes. Cholesterol is our master isoprene or master terpene. We build all of our sex hormones from cholesterol, okay? So anyway, when we're in fed, it's cholesterol forward. So we're making cholesterol because we need to repair stuff. We need to basically do the sex hormones or whatever we're doing there. We need to build tissue. We need to repair tissue. We're rebuilding muscle. We're doing all of that. We're in fed. So those are important things, but we're kind of still playing in the dark, okay? So we're less efficient. We're using glucose as our energy store. Let me make sure I got all my points here. I got to put on my glasses. Cindy loves it when I put on my glasses. Now, one of the things, so a couple more things about fed is that something called AMPK is inhibited. So when we eat, and that is, you'll find that I talk about AMPK a lot. If you've ever talked to Chip, you'll hear him talk a lot about AMPK. Oh, and this is super important. So cancer, okay? Cancer requires that you be in fed mode. Cancer really can't exist if that area of your body is in fasting mode, okay? Pretty important concept. And we'll talk a lot about what happens when AMPK is forward and kind of all the health benefits that it does, but this is the opposite. This is not where we want to be. And again, we're gonna stay in fed mode for 5 hours after we eat a meal. So let's say you're that athlete and you're saying, Chip, this flies in the face of what I've been taught. You're telling me something that I know that if I go out and exercise, that my muscles are going to go through basically this anaerobic to aerobic flip if I exercise for more than 20 minutes. and that they're going to start in sugar mode and they're going to kind of go into dietary fat mode after 20 minutes. And I'd say, yeah, you're right. So if you're in fed mode, your macro, your big picture body is wanting to run on sugar and store fat. You cannot burn fat unless you're a marathoner when you're in fed mode. Now let's say I'm in fed and I am a marathoner and I decide to go out and run. What happens? Well, my body as a whole stays in fed. Okay, it's going to stay in glucose processing as a whole. My muscles might flip between glucose and aerobic processing. Okay, so you kind of have micro and macro, but macro-wise, big picture-wise, for 5 hours after we eat a meal, we stay in fed. We stay in plant in the dark mode. Okay. If you listen to what the USDA tells you to do, or you go research and you say, how often should I eat? Your government will tell you and put you in the closet in plant in the dark mode, because they tell us to eat breakfast, and then 4 to 5 hours later, eat lunch, and then 4 to 5 hours later, eat dinner. And then we're probably going to eat that cookie before we go to bed. And guess what? You stay in fed mode the entire time, plant in the dark mode the entire time. If I'm in that mode all the time, just like a plant in a dark closet, I'm going to be more susceptible to disease, cancers, all the stuff we see that's wrong with us. Okay? Any questions about fed mode? Yep. So again, these are just metabolic states, and you cannot not go into fed if you eat more than 50 calories. So it's like, well, Chip, how do I not do this? You're gonna, if you eat 50 calories. It's just the way our bodies are designed. It's the way our vehicle was engineered, and God engineered our vehicle this way for a reason. So we will go into fed, and we need to go into fed because we need to repair. So we all understand, if we have traumas, or if we're building muscle, or, we have to be able to repair. And in fed mode, we're kind of in repair, but we're in a weakened state in our immune system. Okay? All this making sense? Okay, so let's talk fasting, because fasting is the far better state and where we want to be. So there is a cellular switch. So all you guys playing at home, if you want to pull up your research, AMPK is your magic word. AMPK inhibited is over here in glucose processing, is plant in the dark. AMPK forward. Now we're 50 times more efficient. We're using dietary fats as our fuel to build ATP. We build 136 units of ATP from 1 unit of dietary fat. We build 2 units of ATP from glucose. So we're way more efficient in this mode. And again, this just goes back to the state of the mitochondria. This happens 5 hours, 5 hours after we eat a meal. So again, if you drink a Coke, so a lot of people will say, well, I intermittent fast, I already do this stuff. And one of the ways that you can put yourself in fasting is to intermittent fast. But a lot of people say, well, I intermittent fast already. I only, I eat lunch and then I eat dinner and that's all I eat. It's like, okay, all right. You drink Coke or Pepsi or Diet Coke or Monster or that energy drink? You ever snack on them nuts in between meals? So all those things you have to take into account. Stevia will not throw you into fed. So if you like water and stevia, that's not going to throw you into fed. Tea generally won't. Coffee generally won't. But anyway, in fasting mode, this is going to happen 5 hours after we eat a meal. AMPK will flip. We will become 50 times more efficient. It's literally like taking our little plant and walking him out of the closet and putting him out in the sunshine. Literally, okay? What happens when you're AMPK forward? AMPK forward will kill cancer. So This is a very, I'll tell you a quick story because it's, and I don't think they would, I won't use any names. I don't think they'd mind me using this situation, but been trying to help a child, not in this state even, who's got, I think it's DIPS is the name of the cancer, but it's brain, really bad brain glioma type cancer. And it's a death sentence, right? It's 3 to 4 months of a death sentence. And so been trying to help with, fenbendazole, menbendazole, suggestions of Rick Simpson oil, which they've been open to and tried all these things. They were getting the tumor to shrink for a little bit, but it sort of started coming back up. So again, and the reason that it's last for me is because it's so hard. But I know it'll work. But how do you tell someone, fast your dying child? Fast your dying child, right? So that's a hard thing for people to kind of get to, but it will work. It will work. Again, you can research it on your own, but it will work. When you are AMPK forward, your immune system is way stronger, way stronger. So your immune system is really doing what it's supposed to do. You can't have the type of a full immune response if you're in playing in the dark mode, if you're in the closet over here. You can't have a full immune response if you're in fed. When you're in fasting, you can have a complete type 1, type 2 immune response, and that's kind of what we're supposed to do. The biggest thing that happens, and again, I'm going to refer back to podcast number 1, but our bodies react to what we put in them. Again, how does this work? Well, as we eat these dietary fats, again, our endocannabinoid system understands what types of fats that we're eating by virtue of the endocannabinoids that get built. So every fat you can stick on a triglyceride will build a different endocannabinoid. Saturated fat builds anandamide. Anandamide is what THC mimics, okay? So THC is mimicking endocannabinoid that we get from saturated fat. We build another endocannabinoid from monounsaturated fat. We build several different endocannabinoids from polyunsaturated fat. But when we eat these things, what happens is our vagal afferent nerve, they immediately form endocannabinoids, these fats, and that sends basically feedback to our hypothalamus hippocampus. And we set a nutritional state. So are we getting what we need or are we not? And if we're not, our bodies will react. So when I say most of what happens inside of us is a reaction to our diet, this is what I'm talking about. And how do our bodies react? We'll react by developing a microbiome, and this is a managed event by our endocannabinoid system. It could be so bad, let's say it can get out of control, but within reason, it's a managed event by our endocannabinoid system. Most of what's wrong with us are dysregulations with bacteria, okay? So again, oh, what are you talking about, Chip? Well, satisfy yourself. Siri, Google, what is the cause of disease? Pathogens. Siri or Google, where do pathogens come from? Bacteria. And I study this, every day. I'm deep in this stuff, and just the amount of issues that are caused by bacteria are our main problem. And I put it to you this way: and we understand this, if we take this plant and we've got it in the dark and we've got it in the closet and we've kept it in the closet and then in the dark long enough, it's going to be super subject to bacteria. Again, it's going to start decaying because of bacteria. It's literally going to start rotting in place because of bacteria. And again, we don't like to think of ourselves this way, but that is the state that most of us are in. We are rotting from the inside due to bacteria because we're in a closet in the dark and we don't understand that. Okay, but AMPK, this magic thing, again, you can research this as to almost any human, AMPK in autism, AMPK in neurodegenerative diseases, AMPK in cancer, AMPK, and it doesn't really matter. And you're going to find that AMPK forward, because it relates to mitochondrial function, is a super good thing for that state. Okay, so in this so when we're in fasting mode, what happens with cholesterol? Again, we've built stuff over here, and so when we flip this AMPK switch, it literally shuts off manufacturing of cholesterol. So what we have is what we have when we're in fasting state, and your body recycles cholesterol all the time. You won't make any additional cholesterol if you're in fasting state. This works exactly in the same way that a statin does. So when you go AMPK forward, it does the same thing as a statin. It does something, it inhibits, or it actually promotes something called HMG-CoA reductase. And that's what shuts off cholesterol. So when you go AMPK forward, you're shutting off cholesterol. Just what I'm saying is, if you're out there and you're taking statins, stop. Don't stop. Go, talk to your medical professional about this. Go through this with your medical professional. But be aware of this, that taking that statin is the same thing as just not eating for 5 hours. Not eating for 5 hours is pretty safe. Taking that statin is not. It will have unintended consequences. So if you have high cholesterol, intermittent fast, it will absolutely handle your cholesterol. And again, it's just because of the way that your body works. You're just shutting off one thing and turning on another. Again, if you if someone has high cholesterol, if someone has high estrogen, if someone has high testosterone, if someone has high progesterone, all of those things come from these same processes. And again, there's other kind of things you got to look at, but they're worth looking at. So a couple of quick concepts here to wrap up. Do you guys have any questions on fasting? Yes, sir.
When you said the switch is flipped forward.
Yes.
AMPK is forward. When you are no longer burning glucose, you are now burning triglycerides, and you also burn cholesterol, or you just quit manufacturing?
You quit manufacturing it, and you kind of live with what you've got. You kind of resynthesize it. And cholesterol is really cool the way that it works. So his question was, when we're in AMPK forward, so we're in fasting, do we burn the cholesterol? And we don't really burn the cholesterol. We just kind of use what's there. So if you think about cholesterol, and again, listen to podcast number 2 on the statins and cholesterol, because I kind of do this better justice to this analogy. But the way that we measure cholesterol is through something called LDL, right? So that's our bad cholesterol. And then something called HDL, which is our good cholesterol. Well, let me just explain what those mean real quick. So cholesterol is a fat, and we have to move it around. Well, how do you move it around in blood that's water or water soluble? Well, you got to have a truck, right? A carrier, a vessel. And so those vessels are water-soluble vessels that will carry fats around inside your blood system. And those are LDLs and HDLs. There's also VLDLs. There's several. Chloromycons, I think they're called. But anyway, an LDL is one of those. And so an LDL starts off at your liver. And again, this is when you're in fed. If you just think about kind of how your body should work, let's go through that first. So when you're in fed, let's say you're an athlete, you work out a lot, so you've got a lot of muscle, breakdown that you've done over the day, and you need to repair muscle. Well, what happens is, again, your liver is going to fill up a truck with a bunch of cholesterol and triglycerides, and that's called an LDL. And that LDL is going to, it's going to move through your blood, and it's going to go to wherever that area of need is, and it's going to dump its stuff, right? It's going to dump all of the cholesterol, and that cholesterol is going to be used to do repair. It's going to be like construction material. And that empty truck is going to go back to the liver to get more, and that's called an HDL. So when we look at cholesterol, we're measuring the full trucks and the empty trucks. What does that tell us? Yeah, and how efficient really you're building and kind of dealing with your trucks, right? So that's kind of what happens with cholesterol. That stuff still kind of has to happen even when you're AMPK forward. So you may have an area that still needs to be repaired at kind of a micro level, let's say. Your body in general is not going to be doing that, but you may have areas that you still need to repair. Your brain, things happen to your brain, all kinds of stuff may still need cholesterol. So you still have to have it active, but it's not in active build mode, if that makes sense. It's just sort of functional mode. You need to make cholesterol when you're building things, and that's in fed mode. You need to use cholesterol as just for structure and for some other things, but you don't build any additional, and that's kind of in fasting mode. So no, you don't burn it, to answer your question. 3-hour answer to answer one question, but we got there. No, you don't burn it. But you still use it, you just are not making new cholesterol. Now, when you take a statin, these are huge body processes, so hopefully you guys are getting this. This is like, your master knobs and levers are kind of this cholesterol and fats and burning glucose versus burning dietary fats. So when you jack with that, when you sort of get in the middle of one of those processes with a pharma drug, what we try to do here is I'm trying to, use nature, right? So I'm trying to use the tools that God has given us to kind of influence the way that we work, right? So I'm trying to use nature to kind of go with the way your body wants to go. So if you're in repair mode, if you want to be in that closet, well, let's give you stuff to kind of help you do that better and then get out of that situation, right? Anyway, okay. Anything else on fasting?
So the statins basically stop the prep for all.
The statins.
That causes your liver to build up in cholesterol.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And again, you may be in a build mode by being in fed, but yet you don't have anything to build with. You got a bunch of empty trucks, if you will. And that's really going to confuse, kind of your body, so to speak. Yeah. So, okay. So I want to walk through some concepts. And I'll talk about this one first before I talk about Holly the bear. I want to talk about starvation. Okay. Can you starve? I mean, we can starve, but it takes a lot to kill you by just not giving you food, okay? So, but yet we all have this innate fear of starvation. It is that, if we're sheep, it's the easiest prod is give us the old starvation prod, right? So I want to offer that for your consideration, and I want you to think about starvation in the context of what I'm going to tell you about Holly the bear, okay? Holly the bear is a great study. Holly the bear will tell us so much, and Holly the bear will cement home some of these concepts that we've been talking about. Because Holly is a bear that was studied in Alaska, just so you know who Holly the bear is, and so I study the studying of Holly the bear. Bears are a good study because they understand fasting and fed. They understand how to use these principles to their advantage and kind of how to make them work for them environmentally and dietarily and to improve their health. So let's walk through Holly the bear real quick. And think about starvation, though, in the context of kind of what I'm going to tell you about Holly the bear. Because Holly goes a long time without eating nothing, so 5 months in some cases. So Holly the bear comes out of a cave, and Holly the bear is hungry and skinny, but Holly understands the right kinds of dietary fats to eat to begin to model her brown adipose tissue. And this is important for later. So Holly starts eating a lot she favors omega-3 fatty acids over omega-6s, so she's eating a lot of salmon and fish and things like that. She favors monounsaturated fats over saturated fats. She doesn't eat a lot of other animals. She eats a lot of plants, things like that. So Holly begins to model her fat. And by the end of the summer, Holly is buff. You don't want to mess with Holly the bear. Holly is an MMA bear. There are no fat bears at the end of summer. They're all buff, beefy, muscular bears. Why? Because they all understand fasting and fed, and they understand how to model their fat. Holly then changes her behavior. Holly starts eating more than every 5 hours. Holly starts eating all the time. And Holly starts eating a lot of carbohydrates that have a lot of sugar in them. And when she starts doing this, she literally throws her body into fed. And when you do that, you store fat. You don't burn fat, you store fat. And so Holly starts storing a bunch of fat. So by the end of the fall, you have one big obese bear. Is that because Holly's unhealthy? No. Holly's healthy as heck. Holly created that situation. Holly put on that weight on purpose. If Holly stayed that way for 2 years or 3 years or 6 years, Holly would begin to develop all the things that we get if we're obese. She'd get metabolic syndrome, she'd get diabetes, she'd start having heart problems, all that. But she doesn't, because she goes in her cave and fasts. For up to 5 months, Holly does not consume any food or drink any water. 5 months. Holly's not asleep the whole time. She's kind of up, and depending on how she's modeled her fat, O3, O6 versus monounsaturated, saturated, she'll either have a really good hibernation or a really bad one, but she's up and down. Again, they don't really urinate, they don't really defecate. 5 months, okay? Can you put your body in that state? Yeah, fast. That's the way we're designed to run. So again, that's sort of an extreme example of kind of the adaptation that a bear has done to deal with their environment, because they live in such a cold environment. But they literally put themselves in a state where they, are still have high energy, but don't have to eat or go forage or do anything, for 5 months. So all that's a couple of points. Holly controls her fasting and fed, and thereby controls her weight. Thereby also controls her health. Bears don't get sick when they're hibernating. Bears don't die of cancer when they're hibernating. And I'm talking about playing in the dark, and we're talking about hibernation, but those are complete different concepts, right? So a bear, when they're hibernating, is a plant in the sun. A bear is AMPK forward. A bear doesn't get sick when they hibernate at all. A bear will give birth when they hibernate because it's more advantageous. So Holly can tell us a lot about fasting and fed, okay? A bear won't get cancer when they're hibernating because they're AMPK forward, all right? So, Holly the bear. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about, and this is sort of more of a scientific concept, but in fed mode, in kind of plant in the dark mode, we don't clean up. So it's, our bodies produce a lot of trash, let's say, so we try to do a lot of things. We're making a bunch of chemical medias, we're doing stuff, and we got a lot of trash. If we're cholesterol forward all the time, we've got a lot of dietary fats that we've not used, we probably got a lot of cholesterol that we haven't used, and we probably got a lot of bacteria and stuff that are running around that we just need to get rid of. Well, you don't do that in fed. You're building. You're not getting rid of, you're building. So when you go into fasting, you enter a state called autophagy, where you are basically, cells will sort of grab something that they could think is bad, whoop, and suck it into the cell and then eliminate it, right? And that's a real way that we have a lot of cleanup inside of us. It's a way that our brain cleans up, in a way that our neurons clean up. And so if we're not doing this, we've got a lot of trash inside of us that we don't necessarily, is not useful and could cause other problems. Okay, well that's kind of it for these concepts. So if you guys have any questions? No? Oh, Mick does.
I would sum up, it's healthy for us to go home. Is that correct?
Yeah, and let's talk that through a little bit, because that scares a lot of people. I mean, it makes my tummy hurt even to just think about, it's good for us to go hungry. Your statement, you're right. So what Mick asked is it's really the statement: is it good for us to go hungry? And it is good for us to go hungry. But let me explain that a little bit more, because we really don't want to starve, and we're not going to starve, okay? So that's the biggest thing. As long as we eat every 2 weeks, we're not going to starve. What happens though, and I think I can explain this best by sort of, and I always got to explain things with a little bit of a story, but I think I can explain this with a story of what happens to us, and kind of when you fast, you're going to reach a point, you're going to get super hungry up until a point, and then you're going to reach a point where you won't get hungry anymore. In fact, you won't care about food at all. Your brain will start working better. You'll literally enter an altered state. Now, I'm going by other people's accounts here. I have not done this, but you can go and read all these accounts of people that for a day or two, it's like tough. If you're not eating for, let's say you want to go for a week, without eating. And can you go for a week without eating? Yeah, you can go for months without eating. You might want to do some things before, but you can go for a very long time without eating. But let's say you wanted to go for a week without eating, okay? So, how do we prepare for that? Eating the right kinds of dietary fats. I lost my point, though. Help me get back on track.
It's okay to go hungry.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Back to that. Sorry. Your body, so let's talk that through a little bit more. So I want to, and again, what I want to talk through is cravings versus physical need. And I want you guys to just consider this, that these are two different things. And the reason I'm telling you this is we all have a lot of bacteria. We have a lot of bacteria because we're in the closet, in the dark. And we're not doing this autophagy. We're not, AMPK forward, so we're not able to defend ourselves. So we're kind of a growing situation for rot, let's say. And then if you throw a bunch of dietary sugar on top of that, good bacteria want to grow from fiber, not sugar. Bad bacteria like sugar, okay? So if I put myself in fed mode and then I give myself a bunch of dietary sugars, I'm creating a petri dish for bacterial formation, okay? Bacteria can control dopamine and serotonin. Bacteria can arguably control your mind within reason. And I'll give you some examples of this, and I can give you some examples of how this works, okay? We all know that if we get super duper hungry, and then I'll come right back to your question, and then I want to kind of add a little bit more information. We all know that if we get super duper hungry, we get tummy pains, right? Our tummy will rumble, it'll feel like it's cramping. That's a physiological need. Now, our bodies can fool us into doing that, and you certainly, if you start fasting, you're going to have that happen, okay? Even intermittent fasting. That happens to me, and we've been intermittent fasting for 6 months or so. But so your tummy may rumble, your body may think that you need food, but that's physiological. That has to do with your body, your hypothalamus, hippocampus, sort of the connections and wires in your body that are saying you need nutrients. We've all had this happen where, oh gosh, I'd love to have that cookie right before bed, and that cookie would make me feel good, and it'll be fine, and you'd think happy thoughts about the cookie, right? That got nothing to do with what's going on in here. It's all between the eyes. Now, those different things, yes, those are different things. Bacteria need sugar. Bacteria need certain resources. When you have thoughts about eating things that those bacteria need, they can give you dopamine and serotonin. Wonderful little hits of oxytocin where you go, oh, that's a good thought. And they can manipulate your behavior. Sadly, it's true. Research backed. Now, the cool thing about us, humans, we're multidimensional. We have a soul given to us by God. It has will. It can override anything in this canister. And isn't that what religion is really all about? How do we override our impulse? How do we override our animalistic behavior? But anyway, 24 to 48 hours it takes to get the glucose out of you. those bacteria will scream for glucose until you run through all your glucose. After 24 to 48 hours, what happens is the system that you use for producing, you still need a water-soluble fuel substrate. The mitochondrial need does not go away. The mitochondria were running on glucose, and again, any cell will run on glucose. If I give any kind of bacterial bug glucose, it's going to run. So the cells that have been running on glucose now have to switch their function, and they have to begin running on dietary fats. If you think about a bear, and that takes 24 to 48 hours for you to burn through all your glucose and for those cells to just completely flip over. But what happens is your body does something really cool. It starts making another water-soluble substrate for fuel that's better than glucose, and it's called a ketone. Okay, so we've all heard about ketosis, and we've heard a lot about ketones and all that stuff. Well, ketones is just kind of a water-soluble fat. Our bodies are water and solid, right? Certain organs want to be more water-based because they have to move ions. So our brain in particular, our brain really wants to be electric. Our brain wants to move ions around. So all those mitochondria in those cells really want a water-soluble fuel substrate. Well, if you give them glucose, they'll eat that. But if you give them ketones, they like that way better. Now, why do we only use 10% of our brain? Because we run it on glucose? Yeah, that, okay? So, all this sugar stuff that we're in the middle of now, again, these bacteria want the sugar. The bacteria that are rotting and decaying us want the sugar. 24 to 48 hours, you just got to suffer through those cravings. Again, we're a spirit. We have will. We can override any craving, but you got to suffer through those cravings, and they'll go away. If you read accounts of people who fast 24 to 48 hours, they'll enter, when it happens, you'll feel it. You will enter an altered state of consciousness when the ketones kick in. And you will be up here, not down here, mentally, 50 times more efficient. Yeah.
So how do you recommend or suggest somebody starts fasting? If maybe they don't have a very good diet to start out with, their body could react. So do you have recommendations?
Yeah, this is in some of the literature and the links and stuff, but the easiest way to start doing any of this is intermittent fast. And by intermittent fast, what I'm saying is you want to, as much as possible, we want to be plant in the light mode. Well, the easiest way to do that is just not eat. And again, you're going to go out there for a while, but you are going to have to eat again. So you're going to have to develop a strategy for staying out there as long as possible. That strategy that you'll always come back to is intermittent fasting. So we might fast, for a period of time to maybe heal ourselves, but then the way that we're built to run is really kind of eating one big meal a day or every 2 days. But you can, and that's really hard for a lot of us to, it's like, oh gosh, I can't do that, right? Because of this whole, we get scared we're going to starve, or we have this craving that we can't, get worried about, right? This starvation thing. But that shouldn't be an issue. But the best thing that you can do to begin to start doing this is really, most of us will eat already in a 6 to an 8 hour window. So most of us don't eat breakfast anymore. We eat lunch, and then we'll eat a dinner. If you can cut out the snacks after dinner, if you can just cut down the window that you're eating in. So, a 6 to an 8 hour window is pretty comfortable for most people. And then if you can begin to pay attention to what you're eating in that window. What you're going to find, though, is when you're not eating, water, and I put stevia in my water, you can put lemon in your water, you can do a lot of things to kind of trick up your water or tea or coffee. Just don't put sugar in it, don't put creamer in it, don't put things in it that your body's going to interpret as food, which is more than 50 calories, because that'll throw you right back into fed. So that's kind of the way that we do it. We're getting now to where we're just eating one meal instead of two, but we started off with a lunch and a dinner, and I get hungry on occasion. I don't know how you feel, and I'm talking to my wife Cindy, but I get occasionally hungry, but it's not any like huge deal to eat just one meal a day. So that's kind of the way that we do it, and that's the way that it's most comfortable for people. But there are some resources I put in the links that talk about, the way that other people do it and talk about some methods. You can find a lot of stuff online about intermittent fasting and fasting, so most of that's pretty good. If you have questions, hit us up. I mean, that's what we do, so we're here for the knowledge. Chuck? Okay. All righty. Okay, all right, so there we go. We have people here and we have people watching at home, so I forget that sometimes. All right, so no more questions? Any more? Nick's got another question.
Well, I ask you a personal question then. You said you and your wife eat one meal a day, or you reduce it to one meal a day.
Yeah.
Have you altered the fat, carbohydrate proportions?
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us the secret?
So I guess the best place to start is, what is manna? Okay, so if I could build you a perfect, food to kind of feed you, what would that look like? And what that looks like is it's fat, but it's the right ratios of fat. So cacao butter is a pretty good ratioed out fat. It just needs a little omega-3. So something like a cacao butter that has the 2 types of saturated, or maybe 3 types of saturated fat, has all the different types of polyunsaturated fat and monounsaturated fat. But to break that down a little bit more, we need to eat equal ratios of saturated and monounsaturated fat, and those should be about 80% of our fat content. Okay, so monounsaturated and saturated. Monounsaturated is anti-inflammatory, saturated is inflammatory. About 20%, the rest, or 20% of our fat content should be polyunsaturated, and that's omega-3 and omega-6, and those should be in equal ratios, so as much omega-3 as omega-6. Omega-6 is inflammatory, omega-3 is anti-inflammatory, and that's why we kind of want them in equal ratios. What happens if we don't get them in equal ratios? We eat exactly what we're eating now, too much saturated, too much O6. 80% of us will die of an inflammatory disease. Gee, I wonder why. It's because we're only eating inflammatory fats, and that makes you have to have a whopping biome. But anyway, so eating balance, monounsaturated, saturated, eating balance, omega-3 and omega-6. And again, in a cacao butter, I kind of have to modify it a little bit, but I could give you that. That would be one part. The second part, believe it or not, would be chlorophyll. And the third part would be dietary fiber and a fermenter, in case we missed anything with the dietary fats. And that is all you need to live. That's it. I know. We could probably make it tasty, but that, if you look at everybody, well, we have to have protein to live. Really? What's a protein? A protein is just dietary fats and amino acids stuck together. Okay? I would prefer to make my own amino acids, thank you very much, than eat amino acids that were built by a cow because a cow thought he needed them. So meat is just fat and amino acids bound together. Carbohydrate is really just sugar, right? What's a fruit? Sugar. What's a carbohydrate? Sugar. You really just have 2 inputs. You have 3, light, but we won't even, that gets a little woohoo for most people, so we'll talk about the 2 that we really know about. So you really just have only 2 dietary inputs, sugar and fat. And guess what your mitochondria want? Sugar and fat. I saw the light go on there for a second. I don't know what happened, but something happened. All right, cool. Well, we'll leave it there. So thank you guys very much. Again, these longer form chip talks we'll do with guests, or we'll do in front of an audience like we've done here. We've got some exciting guests coming up. We've got Hawkeye Consulting coming up. We're going to talk about some cool stuff with them. We've got the cancer guys coming up, so we're going to get into cancer hot and heavy. We're going to talk about toxic breast implants. That's going to be a really good show. That's something that is on a lot of older women's minds, let's say, about right now. Not older? Well, mature
Choose your
women.
words wisely.
Yeah, so never mind on that one. We'll cut that part out of the whole chip talks and leave that one there. Anyway, thank you guys very much, and we'll leave it there.